Okay, hello everyone. It's been probably about a week since I have given you an update on the sweater that we're knitting together. And again, what I'm doing in this series is I'm not like knitting all the stitches live, but anytime there's a decision to be done or something that I'm doing throughout the knitting process, I'm documenting it on here so people can sort of hopefully gain some confidence in the knitting process itself and understanding sort of the thought and the decisions that happen as we go through the sweater making process. So in our last video, we actually cast on the sweater after a whole bunch of planning, swatching, blocking swatches, picking the right size, everything. So this is our first time actually seeing part of this sweater. Again, if you do want to make this, you need to buy the pattern. I'm not going to be revealing pattern details here, but I did promise that I would talk to you about a color change. So I'm at the point now where I've got sort of the base bottom hem done, and I'm starting to work up the bottom of the cardigan. Again, it's going to go up the body, and I'm ready to put my very last color. So we even picked the stripe order sort of live in our last video. I'm ready to put the last color in, which is this Docs color, which for people who grew up in the 90s like me, we all know Docs. And this color is just perfect. It's got like a hint of blue. It's like a deep gray blue. Again, the yarn I'm using, all the details tucked below. This is non-superwash merino DK base from the Frosted Stitch here in Ontario, Canada. So what I'm going to go through in this video is I'll show you how I'm doing a color change, which is the simplest way to do a color change, which is simply just starting the next row in a new color. So there's that consideration. I also wanted to talk about the concept in this pattern, which is in a lot of patterns, that sometimes people can get really intimidated by, and it's called at the same time. At least that's what I call it. So in a pattern, if it says at the same time, it means you have to keep track of multiple things going on at once. And for some people, that can be really hard to keep track of. So I wanted to talk through sort of my at the same time process here, and how I'm approaching it to make it sort of easy and straightforward. I'm not the kind of knitter who's using a row counter. I'm a little more intuitive where I sort of read the knitting and figure out what's going on. But at the same time, I like to stay organized and know what to expect. So we'll chat about that. And then the third thing that we're going to talk about is I'm actually at the exact row in the pattern. And again, if you want the pattern, go buy the pattern. This is not sponsored or an ad. It's just a pattern that I chose to do for this project. So you can go ahead and get the pattern, but we are going to place an afterthought pocket, and that technique I'll show you probably live in this video because I've already marked out where I need to do it based on this pattern. So yeah, first thing is the color change. And you can see, I wanted to show the edge here. You can see the edge. I've got all my loose threads hanging on. Again, low production value. We don't have fancy lighting. I've got the best natural light I can right now, but that's all you're gonna get. But yeah, you can see my loose ends hanging out here, which I will weave in later. Some people tend to weave in loose ends as they go. For me, especially in this sweater, I know I'm gonna add a button band here. And just by looking at the pictures of the finished sweater, you can see that. So I'm gonna do that first and see what I can hide in there, because it'll make it easier to weave in and hide it than if I'm going into this stitching here. So I'll just leave these hanging out. I don't do anything with them, but I do make sure they're nice and long. So I would say they're probably 6 to 8 inches long. So that's one thing. So when I come to the end of one color and the start of another, I've just got these little scissory things I got. They're not scissory things, they're scissors. I just trim it off with a good amount of yarn left there. And then as I start my next row, it's knit flat. Oops. All I'm gonna do is pick up my new color, which is this one. Make sure I leave a nice long tail like that. And I am going to just start working that row as per the pattern. And what you'll find is that those stitches, now I need to remind you all, I guess, I am a continental knitter, which means I hold my yarn in my left hand and not my right hand. And I'm also a combination knitter, which means I do my purls with yarn unders instead of yarn overs, and then untwist the stitches later. Those are terms you can go and look up. They're knitting styles. But if the way that I am knitting looks different from the way you're used to knitting, there's all sorts of ways to knit. As long as it looks the way you want it to look in a way that you're happy with, that's all that matters. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Okay, so that's simply how I'm starting the rows. And then I make sure I tug on these when I want to make sure that, you know, my tension is all right. And when I weave in the end, I'll also tug on them. But that is all it is. In this pattern, you do slip stitch at the start of the row, which leaves sort of this jog. You can see this color up here, but we're not going to worry about it. And the reason why it doesn't matter, it makes it a nice clean edge to pick up the button band. And at the same time, as we pick up the button band, that will curl to the back on the inside anyways. So it leaves it nice and clean and makes it easy for us later, and it's not going to be seen on the front of the finished garment. So we're finally getting to see what the 5th color is going to be. I'm so excited for this color, especially then beside this angst color. So this is Docks and this is Angst. And when I stripe them up, it's going to be so good. Anyway, so that's color changing, which is a pretty sort of straightforward way. This is the easiest way to do color change. It's just when you're knitting flat, you just start the new row with a color change. And then I have some markers on here for where I'm placing the pocket based on the pattern. Again, if you want to do this, I cannot say it enough, please get the pattern. But I am going to talk through the steps of an afterthought pocket. I'm not going to share any of the details of the stitches and things, but the way that I learned to do afterthought pockets, which is basically you're putting a placeholder in your yarn for that pocket. So all I'm going to do, and I'll kind of talk about what an afterthought pocket is while I do this, is I'm going through and adding what's called a lifeline. So if you want to look up more about lifelines, do knitting lifeline. Basically, it's a way to secure these stitches. So all I'm doing is using a tapestry needle and I'm moving these stitches. I'm not even moving them. I'm going to put them back on the needle. I just felt like this would be the quickest way while I'm talking. I'm just threading a fingering weight piece of yarn scrap onto these stitches. And the point of that is just a lifeline so that it makes it easy when you rip out the waste yarn that we're about to put onto the pocket. Just makes it easier. Okay, so I put that through and I'll show you what that looks like. And then I'm going to put these stitches back onto the needle. Maybe this wasn't the best way to do it, but we are doing this live and we are only doing it once. Well, I mean, I'm doing 2 pockets, but I'm doing this no editing, no production value series. Otherwise, I'll never get around to actually posting the content. So this way you guys can ask questions if you have questions as we go along. But what an afterthought pocket is, in essence, is a placeholder that will make a little hole in your yarn. And once you've got that secured, you just keep knitting like normal, and then at the end you can very easily add the pocket in. So all it's doing is this is going to be the top opening of a pocket. And again, like I said before, when I was learning how to knit, so much time was spent trying to figure out the right words for things. So if you want more details, afterthought pocket is what you're looking for. Okay, so now all we've got is this extra yarn that's just been threaded through the size of my pocket. And now I'm going to actually switch over to waste yarn. My waste yarn, I decided I'm just going to use some of my main color, but it can be anything. I like to use waste yarn that's the same weight yarn as what I'm actually using in the project. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit across these stitches in the waste yarn. So again, it's just like switching colors. and it's just temporary. So it's going to go in there until we're finished knitting the sweater. And then we're going to pull this out and it's going to make the hole for the sweater. I've got my waste yarn, or my lifeline is a little bit tangled underneath. I feel like it was not the most elegant lifeline. And again, if it looks like I am knitting through the back loop or doing something weird, it's because of my combination knitting style, where I knit my pearls. That's the right term. Where I do my pearls differently. Okay. All right, so now I've got those stitches on with the waste yarn. I'm going to cut my waste yarn, again, leaving a nice long tail so it's not too loose. Okay, now I'm going to move these stitches back over again onto my other needle. And then I'm going to carry on as normal with my actual working yarn. And then once I do that, I can show you what it means for the afterthought pocket. Okay. Just going to toss this to the back. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across with my actual color that I started this row with, which is this sort of dark charcoaly gray color. I'm going to continue. I don't need this anymore. And I'm going to keep it in. This is just to mark where my pocket starts and stops as per the instructions in the pattern. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and knit all the way across again. And this is where there's another way to do a lifeline. I am going to put a lifeline along these top ones as well, which is just going to make it really easy to hold the stitches in place afterwards. And again, this is going to be super confusing until you see it if you don't know what an afterthought pocket is. But you can also use your needles to put a lifeline in automatically if you put some thread, embroidery thread through this little hole in your needles, if you have interchangeable needles, and it will automatically thread it for you while you work. But I'm not using something that's that thin. Okay. So there we go. I'm going to add a few more stitches just past here, just to help keep it secure. Okay. So now I'm going to add a lifeline again to those stitches that I just worked. And again, this is just a tapestry needle, which is a blunt needle with a nice big eye to put yarn through. You can also use embroidery floss or anything small. And I'm just going to go right under these stitches. If you move your stitches to your cable, you see how I'm at my cable and not where my needles are. It's pretty easy to just thread through them. So I'm going to move this over too. And all this is going to do is help me secure those stitches later. Then we'll look at it and I'll talk you through what this means. Okay. So now I've got my afterthought pocket placed. So this purple thicker yarn, when we're done the project or whenever we want to place a pocket, we're going to rip that out. And it only goes this span here, and it's going to create a hole. And then we're going to knit our pocket and put it behind the sweater here, and that becomes the back of the pocket. And then we're going to knit like a little bit on top, probably in this color here, this Doc's color, this sort of grayish, dark bluey gray. And so all we're going to do, we're using these lifelines here that are the thin purple ones, just to catch those stitches when we open this hole up. And we're going to put our needles in through this purple color and then this color. And that's how we're going to work it. And I will show that part when it's time for that. But this is the placement of that. and then I'll be able to carry on my work, and that stuff's just going to stay there for now. And that's where the pocket will eventually go, and it will create a nice hole. Then you don't have to worry about cutting your knitting and losing stitches and having any of the stitches fall down. So that was I feel like that was only 2 things I was going to cover. Oh yes, the third thing I was going to cover was this whole sort of concept of at the same time. So in this pattern, obviously we're striping, so we're doing rows and we need to, change color at the right time. But we also have 2 other at the same times going on, which means in the pattern, one of them is at the same time. We need to watch out for where and when we place these, which row that is. And we also have some increases for some body shaping. So what I like to do when I'm thinking about it is it's actually quite nice and simple with something like this. The complexity of trying to keep track of multiple things at once. You can use a row counter to make sure that you understand how many rows has it been since the last time you did your increases, or since you started your stripes or anything like that. What I like to do is every time I change colors, so since I just changed colors, what I'll do is I'll think about how many rows I'm doing in that color, and then I'll look through the pattern and I'll figure out which of those rows I'm going to need to do. So instead of me remembering, right now I've got, I think 30 some rows on this part. I don't have to remember like, oh, on row 37, do something. I just go, okay, within the next certain number of rows, which rows do I need to watch out for in this strip, in this sort of stripe? And that's how I keep track of it. I say, like, so let's say this stripe is, 15 rows. And I go, okay, I need to do an increase on row 6. And then I keep that in mind, and I know how to read my knitting. So if you're a new knitter, reading your knitting is something that I think will take you to the next level as you're trying to figure out how to be more proficient with your knitting and with your patterns and things. So being able to count your stitches, understand how many rows it is, understanding how many stitches across, and understanding the construction of things so that you can go back and say, when was the last time I did an increase? And you can actually go to the section where your increases are and learning to identify them. Like I can tell that my increases are right here and here. I don't know if you can see me poking my finger through, but they're right here and here, and being able to see how many rows that is from where I am now. These sorts of things will really help you gain confidence and be more comfortable doing things like at the same time in patterns and things that can make it more complex. Because it's not actually complex, you just need to stay organized in whatever way. Another trick that might work for you if you're trying to keep track of an at the same time, I'm just going to pull these are called locking stitch markers, so you can easily remove them at any time, as opposed to these stitch markers where I can only remove them when I get to those stitches because they're just a continuous circle. So these ones are locking. You can get a ton of them. I got these off Amazon and as an add-on. It was not that expensive. But if you're unsure, then just, mark the row. So let's pretend I did an increase right here. Just mark that stitch so that you can easily later, oh, I didn't close it. You can easily later say, okay, how many rows has it been since this stitch? And you can learn how to count it. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a bad example because I'm through my afterthought pocket, so I'm going to ignore that one. And 6. So those are some trips. Listen to me. Those are some tricks to help you feel more confident and keep track of your work, because what you really want to be able to do ideally is the majority of the knitting is actually usually pretty repetitive. And so you want to know when you need to pay attention and when you can sort of pay less attention, whether you're watching a show or listening to an audiobook or a podcast, or some people walk and knit, all sorts of things. You want to do, like, put yourself kind of on autopilot for the portions that are good. And like this one is, almost every row is the exact same. So it's pretty easy to just sort of switch on and start doing that, and then pay attention when you need to and not lose track of where you're at. So those are just a couple tips. I know this was kind of a lot, and those afterthought pockets I think will make a lot more sense if you've not seen one before. Go watch a few other videos about them, but I just thought I'd show it since that's the row I'm at anyways when I happen to be here nearby. So I've got 2 lifelines, one in the row below, one in the row above, and then waste yarn, which is the purple DK weight yarn in the middle. And then later I'll be able to easily pop in a pocket here and place that. And yeah, I don't know when I'll check back in because this has been about a week. It's been a long, busy week for me, so I haven't got too much knitting time in. But it's been almost a week since I cast on, and I got to keep going on the body until I get a certain length, and then it's going to be probably time to split for the arms. And usually I do a size check and a fit check and a gauge check and everything. So that's probably when you'll see me on here next. But as always, pop your comments below if you have any questions along the way. I'm hoping that this can become interactive for people who are following along while I'm actually posting these videos bit by bit, so that I can actually address them in future videos. And if you're watching this way off in the future, that's great too. Hopefully I can remember the answers if you have any specific questions. This is the second time I've made this pattern. All the details are below. And I think that's it. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and thanks for following along. Bye.